Everyone believed Keith Cruz's son had been born completely blind. For 7 years, no one questioned it. Not the specialists who examined him, not the household staff who cared for him daily, not even his own father, who had accepted the diagnosis the night his wife died giving birth. Samuel Cruz lived in a world of assumed darkness, trapped inside a Manhattan penthouse filled with technology designed for the blind, surrounded by luxury he would supposedly never see. He spent his days sitting silently by floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at nothing, clutching a stuffed elephant, barely speaking. A ghost in his own home. The medical reports were clear: complete congenital blindness, no retinal response, no hope for change, just acceptance and adaptation. But everything changed the day Rachel Robinson walked through those doors. She wasn't a vision specialist or a renowned doctor. She was simply a nanny, a 9-year-old woman rebuilding her life after losing her own 3-year-old son to illness. She came to the Cruz penthouse looking for work, carrying grief in her heart and a determination to make someone else's life better since she couldn't save her own child. What she noticed during her first 3 weeks would unravel 7 years of lies, expose a medical conspiracy that had victimized multiple children, and bring to light a truth so disturbing it would make national headlines and change legislation forever. It started small. The way Samuel's head turned when shadows crossed his path, the way his pupils reacted when a lamp flickered, the way he tracked colorful objects moving silently across the room. Details everyone else had missed or dismissed as coincidence. But Rachel paid attention. She watched. She documented. She questioned. And then she discovered the eye drops medication Samuel had been given 3 times a day since birth, prescribed by a trusted doctor, labeled as routine maintenance. Except they weren't routine at all. They were keeping Samuel in artificial darkness, suppressing vision he'd had all along. What started as a job turned into a mission. What began as quiet observation became a fight for justice. And what everyone believed was an unchangeable medical condition turned out to be one of the most disturbing cases of unauthorized medical experimentation ever uncovered. This is the story of a father who had stopped looking, a child who had been silenced, and a woman who refused to accept what everyone else took as truth. This is the story of how Rachel Robinson saved a boy who everyone thought was beyond saving. This is the story of the billionaire's son who wasn't blind. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Comment below where you're watching from, we love hearing from you. And share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that sometimes the truth is hiding right in front of us, waiting for someone brave enough to see it. Now, let me tell you how it all. Rachel's first day at the Cruz penthouse started with a single rule: don't disturb Samuel unnecessarily. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, delivered this instruction while leading Rachel through marble hallways that echoed with emptiness. Mr. Cruz is very particular about his son's routine. Samuel needs consistency, not change. Rachel nodded, taking mental notes of everything. The adaptive technology scattered throughout audiobooks stacked on tables, braille labels on every surface, tactile markers on walls. A home designed entirely around blindness. The previous nanny lasted 3 weeks, Mrs. Chen continued, lowering her voice. She said Samuel's silence made her uncomfortable. Before her, we had another who couldn't handle the disconnection. Some people just aren't cut out for this kind of work. They stopped outside a closed door. Through it, Rachel could hear nothing. No movement, no sound, just profound silence. Samuel is in the living room by the window. He spends most of his time there. You'll find him easy to care for. He doesn't require much beyond his basic needs and his eye drops 3 times daily. Mrs. Chen handed Rachel a small bottle from her pocket. 9 a.m., 3 p.m., and 8 p.m. Never miss a dose. Doctor's orders. Rachel studied the bottle. Opticare solution. The label looked official, professional. She slipped it into her own pocket. One more thing, Mrs. Chen said, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Cruz hasn't been the same since his wife passed. He works from home, but he's distant. He loves Samuel deeply, but grief has made him believe nothing can change. Don't take it personally if he seems cold. I understand. Rachel said quietly. She did understand better than anyone knew. Grief had a way of making you accept the unacceptable, believe the unchangeable, and stop fighting for hope. Mrs. Chen opened the door. The living room was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, afternoon sunlight streaming through expensive curtains, modern furniture arranged with precision. But Rachel's eyes went immediately to the small figure sitting motionless near the window. Samuel. He was smaller than she expected for 7 years old, wearing soft grey clothing, his light brown hair slightly messy, his arms wrapped around a worn stuffed elephant, and his face was turned toward the window, completely still. His eyes were open, but they seemed to look at nothing, vacant, unfocused, empty. Rachel's heart clenched. He reminded her so much of Marcus in those final days, quiet, withdrawn, somewhere she couldn't reach. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. Samuel, this is Rachel. She's going to be helping take care of you now. Samuel didn't move, didn't acknowledge them, didn't even turn his head. He does that, Mrs. Chen whispered. Don't expect much response. But Rachel noticed something the housekeeper didn't. When Mrs. Chen spoke, Samuel's fingers had tightened slightly around the elephant's ear, just a fraction, barely visible. But it was there. He had heard. He had reacted. Rachel stepped forward slowly, not speaking, not trying to force anything. She simply walked to the other side of the room and sat down in a chair where Samuel could sense her presence without feeling crowded. For several minutes, neither of them moved. The apartment was silent except for the distant sound of traffic far below. Then, almost imperceptibly, Samuel's head tilted just a degree or two in Rachel's direction. Not much, not obvious, but enough. Rachel sat very still, barely breathing. She didn't smile or speak or react. She just watched, her trained eyes catching what others had missed for 7 years. This child wasn't as disconnected as everyone believed. He was listening. He was aware. He was trapped inside assumptions nobody had bothered to question. And in that moment, sitting in a silent room filled with sunlight, a supposedly blind boy would never see, Rachel Robinson made a decision. She would pay attention. She would watch. She would question everything. Because something about Samuel Cruz didn't add up. And Rachel had learned the hard way that sometimes the biggest truths hide behind the smallest details, details that everyone else is too busy, too certain, or too tired to notice. Over the next week, Rachel followed the household routine precisely. She administered Samuel's eye drops at exactly 9 a.m., 3 p.m., and 8 p.m. She prepared his meals, helped him navigate the apartment, and sat quietly nearby during his long hours by the window. But while she followed the routine, she was also documenting everything. She noticed that when clouds passed over the sun, Samuel's posture would shift slightly. When shadows moved across the floor, his head would track them, not obviously, but consistently. When Rachel wore her bright yellow cardigan, Samuel seemed to orient toward her more quickly than when she wore darker colors. On day 5, Rachel conducted her first deliberate test. While Samuel sat in his usual spot, she walked across the room carrying a bright red ball, making absolutely no sound on the thick carpet. His head turned, just slightly, but it followed her movement across the space. She repeated the experiment with a blue toy car. Same result. A green stuffed animal. Same result. Rachel's heart raced. These weren't random movements or coincidences. Samuel was tracking visual stimuli. The breakthrough came on day 8. Rachel was organizing toys when she accidentally knocked over a lamp. The bulb flickered brightly before going dark. In that split second, Rachel saw it clearly. Samuel's pupils constricted in response to the sudden light. Her hands shook as she steadied the lamp. Blind eyes don't react to light. They can't. The pupillary reflex requires visual pathways that supposedly didn't exist in Samuel's brain. But she had just watched his pupils constrict. That evening, after administering the 8 p.m. dose of eye drops, Rachel began asking careful questions during dinner. Keith was there, eating mechanically while reviewing documents on his tablet. "Mr. Cruz," Rachel said quietly, When was Samuel's last comprehensive vision evaluation? Keith didn't look up. 2 years ago. Maybe longer. Why? Has he ever been tested for light perception specifically? The diagnosis was complete congenital blindness. There's nothing to perceive. His tone was final, dismissive. Rachel pressed gently. But has anyone tested him recently? Children's neurological development can change, Miss Robinson. Keith finally looked at her, his eyes tired and hard. I appreciate your dedication, but I've heard every theory, every false hope, every miracle cure. Multiple specialists confirmed Samuel's condition. Nothing has changed. Nothing will change. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Rachel nodded and said nothing more. But that night, alone in her room, she pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything she'd observed. Every head turn, every tracking movement, every pupil reaction. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, either every doctor for 7 years missed something, or someone doesn't want Samuel to see. The next morning, Rachel made a decision. She needed to know what was really in those eye drops. Rachel waited until her day off to act. She couldn't tell Keith yet, not without proof. But she needed answers. She photographed the Opticare solution bottle from every angle, capturing the label, the prescription information, and the doctor's name, Dr. Vincent Hawthorne, Pediatric Ophthalmology. Then she called the one person she trusted with medical questions, Dr. Lisa Chen, her former colleague from nursing school who now worked in pediatric medicine at Mount Sinai. Lisa, I need you to look at something, Rachel said, sending the photos. Tell me what this medication actually does. 15 minutes later, her phone rang. Rachel, where did you get this? Lisa's voice was tense. I'm working as a nanny for a child diagnosed with congenital blindness. This is what he's been taking since birth. 3 times daily. There was a long pause. Rachel, this isn't a maintenance medication. Cyclopentolate is a pupil dilator with cycloplegic properties. The dosage shown here, administered long-term to a developing child, it would suppress natural light response and could actually impair vision development. Rachel's stomach dropped. What are you saying? I'm saying this medication doesn't treat blindness, it creates it, or at least maintains it artificially. Why would anyone prescribe this to a child unless they were deliberately trying to keep them from developing normal vision? Rachel ended the call and immediately began researching Dr. Vincent Hawthorne. What she found made her blood run cold. His medical practice had closed 3 years ago. Multiple online searches showed vague references to ethics violations and irregularities in patient care. His name had been removed from hospital directories. His medical license, she checked the state database, had been suspended pending investigation. Rachel found one more thing. A class action lawsuit filed 2 years ago by 3 families, all claiming Dr. Hawthorne had conducted unauthorized treatments on their children. The case had been settled quietly, sealed by confidentiality agreements. Late that night, Rachel made another decision. She needed to see Samuel's complete medical history. If Dr. Hawthorne had been dirty, there would be evidence in those files. She waited until 2 a.m., when she was certain Keith was asleep. Moving quietly through the dark penthouse, she found his home office. The filing cabinet was locked, but after 20 minutes of searching, she found a small key taped under his desk drawer, a widow's security measure, hidden but accessible in emergencies. Her hands trembled as she opened the cabinet and pulled out a thick folder labeled Samuel Cruz Medical Records. For the next 2 hours, Rachel read everything: birth records, specialist evaluations, prescription histories, therapy notes. One name appeared on every single document: Dr. Vincent Hawthorne. His notes were detailed but oddly repetitive. Patient shows no visual response. Complete congenital blindness confirmed. Continue current medication protocol. The same conclusion. Visit after visit, year after year. Never any improvement, never any change, never any question. But Rachel noticed something else. The prescriptions for Opticare solution began the day Samuel was born, before any comprehensive vision testing could have been completed, before any diagnosis could have been definitively confirmed. She photographed every relevant page with her phone, replaced the files exactly as she'd found them, and returned to her room. At 6 a.m., she sent everything to Lisa with a simple message: "I think a child has been deliberately kept blind for 7 years. Help me prove it." The response came within the hour. "This is criminal. You need to tell the father. Now." Rachel stared at her phone. She thought about Keith's grief, his resignation, his absolute certainty that nothing could change. She thought about Samuel, sitting by that window, every day, experiencing a world he'd been told he couldn't see. And she thought about what would happen if she was wrong, if she gave Keith false hope and destroyed the fragile stability he'd built around his son's condition. But then she remembered Samuel's pupils constricting in that flash of light. She remembered his head tracking the red ball across the room. She remembered 7 years of a child's life stolen by medication that should never have been prescribed. Rachel stood up, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward Keith's office. It was time to tell him the truth, whether he was ready to hear it or not. Rachel found Keith in his office, hunched over his laptop, the blue glow illuminating the dark circles under his eyes. He looked up when she knocked, surprised to see her standing there at 7 in the morning. "Miss Robinson, is Samuel all right?" "He's fine, still sleeping." Rachel closed the door behind her and placed a folder on his desk. Inside were printed photos of the medication bottle, Lisa's medical analysis, and screenshots of Dr. Hawthorne's suspended license. "But we need to talk about his treatment." Keith's expression hardened. "I thought we already had this conversation. When was the last time you actually tested Samuel's vision yourself?" Rachel interrupted. "Not through a doctor. Personally. With your own eyes." "What are you talking about?" Rachel opened the folder. "These eye drops Samuel has been taking since birth? They're not maintenance medication. They're pupil dilators with cycloplegic properties. Long-term use in children suppresses natural vision development." Keith stared at the papers, his face pale. "That's impossible. Dr. Hawthorne prescribed them. Dr. Hawthorne's medical license was suspended 3 years ago for ethics violations. There are sealed lawsuits from other families claiming he conducted unauthorized treatments on their children." Rachel's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "And I've been watching Samuel for 3 weeks. He responds to light. He tracks moving objects. His pupils constrict when exposed to sudden brightness." "You're wrong." Keith stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Samuel is blind. Multiple specialists confirmed it. This is just..." "Then prove me wrong." Rachel met his eyes. "Right now, let me show you what I've seen. If I'm mistaken, I'll resign immediately. But if I'm right..." She paused. "If I'm right, your son has been able to see this whole time, and someone made sure he didn't know it." Keith's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk. For 7 years, he had lived with absolute certainty. For 7 years, he had accepted his son's blindness as unchangeable truth. And now this woman, this nanny he'd hired 3 weeks ago, was telling him everything he believed was a lie. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Prove it." They walked to Samuel's room together. The boy was awake, sitting on his bed with Dumbo the elephant, humming softly to himself. He turned his head slightly when they entered. "Samuel," Rachel said gently, kneeling beside the bed, "I'm going to shine a light. Can you tell me if you see anything?" She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket. Keith stood in the doorway, arms crossed defensively, his entire body rigid with tension. Rachel clicked the flashlight on and slowly moved it across Samuel's field of vision. At first, nothing happened. Keith's shoulders began to relax, a bitter vindication crossing his face. "See?" his expression said. "I told you." Then, gradually, Samuel's eyes began to track the light. His pupils constricted. His head turned to follow the beam as Rachel moved it left, then right, then up. Keith gasped audibly. "Samuel," Rachel said softly, "can you see the light?" There was a long pause. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Keith's ragged breathing. Then Samuel spoke, his voice small and uncertain. "It's bright? Like yellow?" Keith's knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling, tears streaming down his face. The flashlight clattered to the floor as Rachel caught Samuel in her arms. "You can see it?" Keith whispered, moving closer. "You can really see it?" Samuel looked confused by his father's tears. I always saw lights. And colors, sometimes. But everyone said I was blind, so I thought." He trailed off, not understanding why this moment mattered so much. Rachel continued testing. She held up a red toy block. "What color is this, Samuel?" Samuel squinted, concentrating. "Red?" Keith made a sound, half sob, half laugh. Rachel showed him a blue ball, then a green book, then a yellow crayon. Samuel identified each one, sometimes hesitantly, but correctly. His vision wasn't perfect. He had to concentrate, and shapes were unclear unless they had high contrast. But he could see. He had always been able to see, in his limited way. Keith sank onto the bed beside his son, pulling him into a crushing embrace. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into Samuel's hair. "I'm so sorry." Samuel hugged him back, still confused but sensing something important had shifted in his world. Rachel stepped back, giving them space, her own eyes wet with tears. She had been right. 7 years of a child's life had been stolen by medication that should never have been prescribed. That night, Keith couldn't sleep. He sat in his office at 3 a.m., staring at the bottle of Opticare solution like it was a bomb. His phone was already dialing before he consciously decided to make the call. Jennifer Hayes, his lead attorney, answered, alert despite the hour. She was used to Keith's late-night emergencies. "Jennifer, I need you to find someone. Dr. Vincent Hawthorne. I don't care where he is or what it takes. Find him." Keith's voice was cold, controlled. "And prepare for a lawsuit, a big one. What happened? Someone kept my son blind for 7 years. And I'm going to make sure they pay for every single day." The investigation moved with startling speed once Keith Cruz put his resources behind it. Within 48 hours, his team located Dr. Vincent Hawthorne living quietly in Scottsdale, Arizona, under semi-retirement. Within a week, they had subpoenaed his financial records, patient files, and correspondence with pharmaceutical companies. What they uncovered was worse than anyone imagined. Dr. Michael Torres, the independent ophthalmologist Keith hired to evaluate Samuel, delivered his report in person. "Mr. Cruz, your son has partial functional vision that was systematically suppressed. The medication he was given created an artificial blindness state. With proper therapy, Samuel's vision will improve significantly. He should have been developing visual processing skills for the past 7 years. Instead, he was chemically prevented from using what sight he had." Keith's jaw tightened. How is that possible? How did no one catch this? Because only one doctor ever evaluated him, Dr. Torres said carefully. Dr. Hawthorne controlled every assessment, every report, every diagnosis. There were no second opinions, no independent evaluations. You trusted him completely. "I did." Keith's voice was hollow. "God help me, I did." The private investigator's findings were damning. Dr. Hawthorne had been receiving payments from Vista Farm Industries, a pharmaceutical company developing vision suppression treatments for extreme light sensitivity disorders. The payments were substantial, $250,000 per child enrolled in 65. His study, plus annual bonuses, for sustained suppression. Samuel wasn't the only victim. The investigation uncovered 5 other children, all diagnosed by Hawthorne as completely blind, all prescribed the same medication, all showing vision improvement once the drops were stopped. Rachel met with 2 of the other families. The Johnsons from Connecticut. "Our daughter Emily was supposedly born blind. We stopped the drops 6 months ago after reading about your case online. She can see colors now. She drew us a picture." The Patels from New Jersey. "Our son Dev is 8. He's been on those drops since birth. We're stopping them today. We should have questioned this years ago." The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Tech billionaire's son kept blind by experimental drugs ran on every major news outlet. Television crews camped outside the penthouse. Rachel found herself on morning shows, her face on screens across the country. "How did you know something was wrong?" the interviewer asked. "I paid attention," Rachel said simply. "I watched Samuel respond to light and movement, and I couldn't reconcile what I was seeing with what I'd been told. Sometimes the truth is right in front of us, but we're too willing to accept expert opinions without question." Vista Farm Industries' stock plummeted 40% in a single day. Their CEO resigned. Their experimental vision suppression program was shut down immediately. But the most dramatic moment came when Keith's legal team finally confronted Dr. Hawthorne. They found him at his Scottsdale home, a modest house with desert landscaping, far from the prestigious medical centers where he'd once practiced. He answered the door in a golf shirt and khakis, his face going pale when he saw Keith Cruz standing on his doorstep with lawyers and a private investigator. "Mr. Cruz, you kept my son blind for 7 years." Keith's voice was quiet, deadly calm. "You took money from a pharmaceutical company to conduct unauthorized experiments on children. You prescribed medication that suppressed their vision development, all while telling their parents nothing could be done." "It wasn't like that," Hawthorne said quickly. "The research was important. We were developing treatments for debilitating light sensitivity. My son wasn't sick. He didn't have debilitating light sensitivity. He had partial vision that you systematically destroyed. The children weren't harmed permanently. 7 years. Keith's control snapped. He stepped forward, and Rachel quickly grabbed his arm, pulling him back. 7 years of my son's childhood. 7 years of development he'll never get back. 7 years of believing he lived in darkness when you were the one keeping him there." Hawthorne's lawyer stepped between them. "My client has no comment at this time. He doesn't need to comment," Jennifer Hayes said calmly, handing over a thick envelope. "He's being served. Criminal charges, unauthorized, human experimentation, medical fraud, child endangerment, civil lawsuit on behalf of 6 families. And we're just getting started." The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks later. The medical board scheduled an emergency session to permanently revoke Hawthorne's license. The FBI opened an investigation into Vista Farm Industries. But while the legal machinery ground forward, something more important was happening inside the Cruz penthouse. Samuel was learning to see. Daily vision therapy sessions with Dr. Torres helped him process visual information his brain had never properly developed. He practiced identifying colors, shapes, faces. He learned to read large print books. He spent hours looking at photographs, asking questions about everything. What color is the sky supposed to be? Why do people's faces look different from each other? Is that what you look like, Dad? Really? Keith answered every question, no matter how basic, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. With each one, Rachel watched Samuel's progress with quiet pride. The silent, disconnected boy from 3 weeks ago was gone. In his place was a curious, talkative child, discovering a world he'd been told didn't exist for him. One afternoon, Samuel asked to go outside. It was a simple request, but it meant everything. For 7 years, he'd rarely left the penthouse. There had seemed no point he couldn't see the world anyway. But now he could. Keith, Rachel, and Samuel walked through Central Park together on a bright October afternoon. Samuel's hand gripped Rachel's tightly as he stared at everything: the brilliant autumn leaves, the people walking dogs, the children playing, the sunlight filtering through trees. "It's so much," he whispered, overwhelmed. "There's so much to see." "Yes," Rachel said softly, "there is. And you have the rest of your life to see it all." That evening, back at the penthouse, Keith found Rachel in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know how to properly thank you for what you've done." Rachel shook her head. "I just paid attention. Any good caregiver would have." "No," Keith's voice was firm. "They wouldn't have. 6 other nannies before you saw the same things and never questioned anything. You saved my son. You gave him back his sight. You gave him back his future." He paused. "You gave me back my son." Before Rachel could respond, Samuel appeared in the doorway, holding a piece of paper. "I made something," he announced proudly, holding up a crayon drawing. It was rough, the lines shaky, the proportions off, but it clearly showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. "It's us," Samuel explained. "You, me, and Rachel. We're a family now, right?" Keith's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Rachel, who was also crying, and then at his son, who was smiling really, genuinely smiling for the first time in living memory. "Yes," Keith said, pulling them both into an embrace. "We're a family." The legal battle was far from over. Dr. Hawthorne would face trial. Vistafarm Industries would pay millions in settlements. National legislation would be proposed to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. But in that moment, standing in a kitchen in a Manhattan penthouse, 3 broken people who had found each other understood that they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. Samuel could see, and he would never be kept in darkness again.